Mark, there is a headline on Democracy Docket, your website, that caught my attention that absolutely is worth talking about here. I'm going to put the headline right here on the screen. SCOTUS, the Supreme Court, could get a chance to disenfranchise voters whose ballots arrive after Election Day. So can you expand on what is happening right here as far as the Supreme Court is concerned and the extent to which it would impact mail-in voters?
Yeah, this is critical for everyone listening to this video to pay attention and share this with your friends. The Republican Party has had as part of its voter suppression mission for years to throw away as many mail-in ballots as possible. And one of the ways they want to do that is to say that voters who cast their vote, put it in the mail before Election Day, but where, because the mail may be slow or whatever, the ballot comes in, say, the day after the election. Now, it's been postmarked. The Postal Service knows when it was mailed. The election office knows when it was mailed. There is no question, this is a lawful vote. There is no question that this ballot was cast on or before Election Day. The only issue is whether it was received on Election Day, before Election Day, or the day or two after. And Republicans have had it one of their top priorities to prevent these ballots from counting. My team and I, we have litigated dozens and dozens of lawsuits to prevent these ballots from being disenfranchised. Well, the Republican National Committee came up with a scheme in 2023 to file a lawsuit, not in a swing state, not in a battleground state, not even in a blue state, but in Mississippi, which allows for these kinds of ballots, to file a lawsuit in Mississippi to try to throw these ballots out, hoping that it would escape the attention of anyone, because after all, they figure who's paying attention to lawsuits filed in Mississippi. Well, my legal team and I, we caught it. We intervened to defend the state of Mississippi because, who knows whether the Republicans in Mississippi would defend the law in Mississippi. Right. And that case is now progressing up the courts, and the state of Mississippi recently indicated that they are going to try to get this before the U.S. Supreme Court. And this has major implications for voters throughout the country, for voting rights throughout the country, but also it has major implications for Donald Trump's executive order, which targets these ballots and relies on this Mississippi case to argue that he has the power to ban these ballots from being counted nationwide.
Now, you had mentioned that these kind of cases have been litigated before, so I presume that there's already precedent, at least from the appellate court level. And the second part of that is, would that matter as far as this Supreme Court is concerned? Does that carry any weight?
Yeah. So look, the Republican efforts around this have failed everywhere until they got to the Fifth Circuit in this Mississippi case.
So they basically found one of the most conservative jurisdictions that they could in the Fifth Circuit as a vehicle to get this thing up to the Supreme Court. That's
exactly right. And I think that what they had hoped for, which is what they did, is that they would sue a reliably red state so that if the RNC lost before the Fifth Circuit, they could appeal.
Right.
If if they won, as they did before the Fifth Circuit, perhaps Mississippi would appeal. Now, I don't know that that's why maybe Mississippi.
No, but it makes perfect sense, because either way, if you have basically on both sides people who are aligned in their idea that they want this thing to get up to the Supreme Court, you go to a friendly jurisdiction, a friendly appellate court jurisdiction, and you say either way, whether it's us who wins, you guys appeal it up to the circuit court. If it's you who wins, we'll appeal it, and then once we get to the appeals court, whichever one loses gets it up to the Supreme Court. This way, we're guaranteed to know that it can get up there, and either way, we're both we're both on the same team here, knowing full well that we want this issue to just go to the highest court in the land.
Right. So look, I don't know that that's what's going on with Mississippi, but there are certainly some signs to it. For example, after the RNC filed their lawsuit, the Mississippi legislature took steps to repeal the law. I mean, after all, the Republicans control the Mississippi legislature. They're like, okay, RNC, apparently you don't want this law in Mississippi. We'll repeal it. And then suddenly, at the very last minute, the governor was getting the pen ready to sign. All of a sudden, they repealed the law that they passed, and it did not go through. So certainly, the state of Mississippi was acting like they wanted this case to proceed, and ultimately, Mississippi is appealing it to the Supreme Court. But here's the good news for folks. As I mentioned, my law firm and I are in this case. We intervened at an early stage to make sure that this would not just be the state of Mississippi and the Republican Party. So we are going to fight tooth and nail if this case gets taken by the Supreme Court to prevent this from happening. But Brian, there is another critical element of this that has taken place in recent weeks that I think everyone needs to pay attention to, which is that Donald Trump then signed an executive order to try to ban these ballots from counting nationwide, and cited this Mississippi case as the predicate for him being able to do that.
How enforceable is that executive order? I mean, is that only enforceable in the event? Is it like a trigger executive order where as soon as Republicans hope this gets upheld in the Supreme Court, then the executive order goes into effect nationwide?
No, he's claiming he has this authority. Now, he doesn't. My law firm and I were also suing over the executive order, saying Donald Trump doesn't have the authority. And you and I have done a video on this. Donald Trump doesn't have the authority under the Constitution to decide how states set their laws for elections. It's not within the power of the executive branch. But it is an interesting, again, I am not a conspiracy guy by nature, but it is an interesting thing that, all of these things are going on. Donald Trump is trying to effectuate this through executive order, cites this case out of the Fifth Circuit. Mississippi is appealing or seeking review by the U.S. Supreme Court. As I said, we are going to be in that process to make sure that we are making the strongest arguments possible, but also the follow-on effects of this, Brian. If Trump gets his way, if the Republican National Committee gets its way, what they are saying is federal law decrees there is one election day, and therefore ballots that come in afterwards can't count. Well, you know what else goes away in that circumstance?
What?
Early voting, because that's not done on election day either.
Right.
Mail-in voting, because they fill out the ballots not on election day. This is a Trojan horse by the Republican Party to try to undermine everything except for voting on election day. And honestly, if you listen to Donald Trump and take him literally and seriously, the big mistake that the legacy media makes is they say, don't pay attention to what he literally says, but only but just sort of the general spirit. He has said he only believes people ought to be able to vote in person on election day. Donald Trump wants to take away your voting rights because Donald Trump knows that the greatest threat to him and his authoritarian impulse is that in 2026, you won't be able to vote early. You won't be able to vote by mail. Your ballots will be thrown out. There'll be all of these new restrictions. The proof of citizenship nonsense will knock out young voters and first-time registrants and women who changed their name due to marriage. This is all part of a common plan. But this case, going to the U.S. Supreme Court, is a critical element of that. And that's why it is important that everyone pay attention to it.
Two questions here. A, when will it be argued? And B, are the implications here that if the Supreme Court rules in the RNC's favor, then that also lends itself to reason that the Supreme Court might also uphold this idea that's being perpetuated by Trump's executive order, that they're kind of one and the same. If they agree with one principle, they're likely to agree on the other.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think this dovetails directly together.
Right.
The fact is that Donald Trump's executive order is hinging its legitimacy, its theory on this case. It is no surprise then that the Republican National Committee has been advancing this case. And it is no surprise that if the Supreme Court takes this case, it will be heard in October or November or December of this year and in place for the midterm elections in 2026. Again, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is just a concerted plan and effort by the Republican Party to make it harder to vote and easier for them to cheat. And the harder to vote part are all of these voter suppression laws. We all know what the easier to cheat part is. That's the election subversion. That's the, putting election deniers in office. And Donald Trump's got a lot to say about that also. And I suspect we'll see additional executive orders on that front in the future. But there is a massive voter suppression war machine that continues to grind away day in, day out. And it is largely funded by the Republican National Committee and by right-wing donors. And this case sits at the center of that.
Can you explain to me what the legal rationale or the statutory rationale is? Because the Constitution doesn't say anything about mail ballots or anything like that. And so what would the legal basis for them being able to decide out of whole cloth that suddenly, the specific details of certain ballots suddenly aren't valid anymore, that you can't use mail-in voting anymore, which is something that we've used for decades in this country. So I'm just curious, do they have a leg to stand on, legally speaking?
Yeah, so their legal theory is quite simple and extraordinarily dangerous. Their legal theory is that federal law sets election day for federal elections as the Tuesday following the first Monday in November. Okay? We all know that's election day. Yeah. And they read that statute, which just says what I just said. That's it. They read that to mean that is the only day in which the election can take place, and therefore ballots can't be counted afterwards. Now, what is the implication of that? Number one, it has implications, obviously, for mail-in ballots that are received after Election Day, even if they're cast before. Number two, it would potentially mean that no ballots could be counted after Election Day, right? We've seen, when did we hear Donald Trump say, stop the count, right? Remember the whole red mirage?
Yeah.
Right? That's all about this notion that once the clock strikes midnight, they should stop counting.
Yeah.
And so this is part of that philosophical false legal argument. I mentioned the third implication, no early voting, right? If Election Day is just the one day, it means you can't vote early. They are trying to pass a radical adjustment to what voting is in the United States. It is a single day. It is in person. It is all done on paper ballots. All votes are tallied by hand on paper ballots. And when the clock strikes midnight, perhaps you have to stop counting.
Yeah.
Then the election deniers come in and decide what ballots should be certified and what ballots shouldn't be certified. If you think this is fanciful, if you think this is not possible, just go back and read what they were saying in 2020.
Yeah, or watch what they're doing in North Carolina right now.
What they're doing in North Carolina right now.
Yeah. And finally, let's finish off with this. You'd mentioned that you had intervened on behalf of the state of Mississippi. Are you litigating this case at the Supreme Court?
Yeah, so we represent some great private organizations that have joined the lawsuit, intervened to defend the Mississippi law. So we are on the same side as Mississippi. And again, we'll see. Maybe Mississippi will aggressively defend this lawsuit. I hope they do. I hope they make all the best arguments. But we will also be in the courtroom. We will also be filing briefs. We will also be arguing. And this is a critical case. I have pointed out before, I have argued 4 cases in the Supreme Court. I am 4-0 in the Supreme Court. I never predict an outcome. Every case you have to treat like you are in jeopardy of losing. But I promise you, this is a case that we will take very, very seriously. If the Supreme Court hears it, you can expect to see me in court.
Well, if ever there was an impetus for folks who are watching right now to support the invaluable work that you and your team are doing, it's exactly that. So I'm going to put a link on this screen and also in the post description to Democracy Docket. That's the news outlet Mark founded to focus on everything voting in elections, of which this is a major component. So again, to show some support for Mark and his team, please sign up. Not only a great way to support him and his team, but also a great resource in terms of fearless independent journalism at a moment where it's especially needed. So again, link on this screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.